my hair's grayer than my brown shoe polish is showing, so. Good morning. I'm not going to give you your riddle until the end of this lesson, okay? Because last week I'm embarrassed that you guys, I didn't even get finished with the riddle and you already knew the answer. Gee whiz, that wasn't much of a riddle, was it? But if you would, let's turn over to Proverbs. Because there's been a purpose for me to be in Proverbs. And I think this is the third week. Yeah, I think it's the third week I've done this. And possibly the fourth week. But we've just covered the first 7 verses. And let's read those things again right quick. Kind of get the juices flowing in our brains here. And I am reading from the New American Standard. So it reads like this. Chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. To give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning. A man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." So we've covered this how many times now? And every time you read it, do you get a little more out of it? Or do you just kind of like, same old thing? Do you think any deeper into this with all the stuff that we've covered before? In this, I'm going to give a quote first from a play. And I don't know much about this, but this is something that I think everyone in here has probably heard this at one time or another. Maybe younger people may not have heard it. And like I say, I don't know much about. I know the purpose of why it was written and why it was spoken, but I don't know much about the play itself. So pardon my ignorance on that because I have not studied that part of it. But here's the quote: "To be or not to be? That is the question." Anybody know who said that? Hamlet? No. Shakespeare wrote this. And I like the way a cartoon used to pronounce his name. They called him Shaky Spear. Because if you look, there's a little E in there. Sometimes some people call it Shaky Smear, but Shaky Spear. But Shakespeare wrote this. No, it's in the tragedy of Hamlet. The full name of it is The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. That's the full name of the play itself. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up is if you take 2024 and subtract 1599 from that, you'll wind up that this play was written approximately 425 years ago. You think, wow, how smart was that guy from 400 and something years ago? Now what is this to be or not to be? That is the question. Well, what is the question about this? What's the purpose of them even saying this? Well, I had to dig this one up a little bit, but Hamlet is musing glumly. And to be glum is like you're not too particularly, you're not looking forward to something. You're feeling kind of rotten about things. Hamlet is musing glumly on the nature of suicide. So he says, to be or not to be? That is the question. If I kill myself, what happens then? So he's posing things in his mind here. I know very little else about what Hamlet is about. But again, you think about this question. To be or not to be? Well, maybe you might ask this question. To be a Christian or not to be a Christian? That is the question. I assume that if you're in this building, that you've answered that question in what we would call the positive. But think of the people that would say, I don't want to be a Christian. And they think of it as they're positive. So, would two positives, a positive plus a positive, give you a double negative? Only English teachers might be able to answer that particular question. So, with that being said, if it was 425 years ago that was written, and we consider Shakespeare to be a guy with a lot of insight, how long ago was Proverbs written? Anybody have any idea? And oddly enough, it's still being read today, probably being read way lots more than Hamlet. Right? Well, just looking it up, I looked this up just to make sure about this. Proverbs was probably written around 700 BC. So if we take 700 and add it to 2024, we're looking at 2,724 years ago. And we're still reading from Proverbs. But what's so special about Proverbs? Well, it comes down to that last verse in chapter 1. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Wisdom and instruction. You remember what it was like to have to sit through English class? Was that not one of the dullest classes you ever took? Especially for those of us that had to diagram sentences and, well, what's the purpose in all this stuff? We don't speak that way. Well, again, you come back to, what's the purpose of getting rid of ignorance? Does anybody in here want to like to be called stupid? How about being called ignorant? Which one is the worst of the two that would be applied to you? Well, ignorance is one thing, but remember, stupid is another. And I always illustrate it with burning my hand on the stove. Did it one morning, came back the next morning, saw the same scenario, and I did not put my hand on the. I learned. My ignorance turned into a positive for me. So, Proverbs, that's what this is. Verse 4, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth, knowledge and discretion. Knowledge and discretion. See, I used a little discretion to keep from burning my hand again. A wise man will hear and increase in learning. A wise man. Now, we're not talking about some wise cracker that we see on TV, has all these smart reply about stuff like that. Those of you that have been around me, I tend to have wise cracks from time to time. Sometimes they're in poor taste, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're not funny, and sometimes they are. But verse 6, to understand a proverb and a figure. Well, we know what Proverbs is. But we come down to this word know. And we're talking about K-N-O-W. And then also the word known, K-N-O-W-N. Okay? And then there's finally another one, knowledge. Which one comes first? To know? Known? Or knowledge? What happens when you say, I've known that for a long time? Does that kind of put you in the past tense? Or is that the present tense telling somebody, I've known that for a long time? You don't say, I know that for a long time. Well, maybe you can. But we have a precise word for this. And speaking of precision, that's another thing about Proverbs. It's pretty precise in its language. And from what I understand about the English language, it is probably the most precise of all the languages spoken on the face of the earth. And maybe one of the reasons why is because it's a conglomeration of a lot of different languages. Okay? Maybe the summation of this. For those of you that don't know, airline pilots, most pilots in the world are required to speak English. Where did aviation start? Right here in the United States. So again, it's a requirement. That way we're not all speaking. Someone flies in here from Japan, and it's a Japanese pilot, and he's trying to speak Japanese to American pilot controllers. What do you do? So, with this, I'll say this about Proverbs. It's not ambiguous. It means what it says. Okay? No matter how much we try to skirt around these issues, it means what it says. So let's just tackle the meanings of a couple of 2 or 3 words. And the first word is know. K-N-O-W. It's a verb. Denotes action. You know something, don't you? Or you don't know something. Either way, it's an action. According to the dictionary, it says to perceive directly. And as an example, I know it. I know to perceive directly. Second part of this, and this is one I think is definitely worth remembering. To have information in your mind and to be certain about something. 2 plus 2 is how much? 7? There's your answer right there. You can be certain that that's correct. There's no ambiguity. I can't say the word, dadgummit. I can't get it to come out of my mouth. It's not ambiguous, okay? And then there's a third part to this meaning. It's just to know facts. And I'm not talking about F-A-X. I'm talking about F-A-C-T-S. Facts. 2 plus 2 equals 4, doesn't it? That is a fact. 2 plus 2 does not equal 2. 2 times 2 equals 4. Those are facts. Very simplistic way of understanding things like that. A fact. Now look here, and I wrote in my notes, it says, I don't know. I do know. What do you know? To know facts. You ever heard this one? Hey, what do you know, Joe? What does Joe say back? I don't know nothing. I've replied that way myself several times. But am I joking? Well, what do I know? How long have you known it? Okay. How about this one? Are you in the know? How much in the know are you with this? Do you just know a few things? Or do you know a whole lot? Does a whole lot of stuff confuse you? Or does a whole lot of stuff clear up your mind about what this is about? Okay? Go to the next definition. It's the word knowledge. It's a noun. It's a thing. Now, the bad thing about, notice that, the bad thing about knowledge is that, can you grab a handful of it? Well, maybe you can grab a steel ball. You're looking at something that was an idea at one point in time. Someone took a scoop full of dirt and converted it into a useful piece of steel. We ride around on steel wheels. We use steel. Steel is everywhere. It's, you can hold the culmination of knowledge about dirt and what it can do for you right there when it's used for the purpose of making steel. Knowledge is a noun. It's understanding of or information about a subject that you get by experience or study. How many of us have gone to school at what's called the School of Hard Knocks? Right here. Life is about the School of Hard Knocks. If you're one of the lucky few that's just kind of skated through without a whole lot happening in your life, well, there's not much I can say there, okay? But to your advantage, look back on it and learn from it. Why did it go that way? Why did I almost die in a motorcycle crash 10 days before I turned 30 years old? I hadn't got an answer for it other than I was being an idiot. Going too fast in the wrong place, and someone else made a mistake, and both of us paid the price for it. He lost his car, and I almost lost my life. And a lot of other things. Okay? So if I look back on it, would I have been going between 85 to 100 miles an hour that day? Or would I have just chose to go the same speed but took a different road, took a chance somewhere else? What do you do with your knowledge? Do you just sit on it?
When it comes time and you get into a religious discussion with somebody, do you keep your mouth shut because you're afraid? I can't explain this? Well, why can't you explain it? Is it because you do not know? You don't have that knowledge tucked up there in your head? Then who's to blame for that? Is that God's fault? You have to come back, introspection. And it's a sad situation if you find yourself lying to yourself. Why didn't I take 5 minutes out of one day in the week to read, to learn? Why? Well, again, those of you who've heard me speak, it comes back down to serving self. Who you serve? Who does God want you to serve? Okay? So, looking at my notes, I read here, so do we, or you, collectively, do you call it ourselves? That's a collective. Or in the singular, yourself. Do we call ourselves disciples? I have a friend that he attends in Houston, and you've heard me make a few comments about this before, but he attends what's called Disciples of Christ. And when the churches of Christ, back in the 1800s, towards the end of the 1800s, they started splitting off into various churches. And one of the churches that came from the churches of Christ were the Disciples of Christ. Okay? And they kind of getting themselves into a sticky wicket these days. But disciples, could you call yourself a disciple of Jesus the Christ? I try to. I declare it. How good am I at it? I'll be judged over that someday. There's no escaping that one. That's that little splinter that's put in your mind all the time about this. Disciples of Jesus the Christ. Or here's a question right here. And hopefully this will stick in your mind. And this is like an English test almost. What is the root word of discipline? Disciple. Boil it down in your mind. Discipline. The root word is disciple. We read about disciples here, don't we? They're disciple of God's way long before Jesus walked the earth. But when you think of disciples, what comes to mind? Disciples of the Christ. That's what comes to my mind. But what about the guy that wrote this? What about Samuel? One of the wisest judges we've ever had in the world. Probably one of the few that was absolutely honest about what he did. And just keep going backwards or come forward. Disciples. So, what is discipline? Run wild in the streets? Throw paint on your buddy's car? Bald-faced lie to somebody? I didn't steal that. Oh no, not me. I'm not gonna be responsible for any of that sort of thing. Well, who's lying to who then? How good is self-judgment? Especially if you don't have a standard of to bear against this standard that you want to say, okay, I'm a good person. Where is that standard? Well, this is the standard right here. This is the gold, platinum, you name it, any of the precious metals. This is the standard that the world goes by. Whether they want to admit it or not, this is the standard. But how do you know the standard unless you read it? And how do you perform the standard unless you know how? Discipline is a noun. Again, that's a person, place, or a thing. Control gained by enforcing obedience or order. Pardon me for using this example, but I think about Bill Roach. Goes into the Marine Corps. Get off the bus, get your hair cut, and snap to, clown. You're going to learn some obedience and you're going to learn how to behave yourself. Is this the way the Bible works? one word in here, or two words combined together, are one of the prime things that the Bible talks about. It's called self-control. You've heard me say this before. If God wanted a world full of robots, He would have built a world full of robots. Well, what purpose would they serve? What is your purpose? Again, an oversimplification it might be. You will be judged as to whether or not you are a trustworthy servant. I've given you a lifetime to prove it to me. Self-control. Self-control. Well, what, gee whiz? What do you think? And I'll just use this. What kind of self-control do you think Satan teaches? Hey, you can eat that apple. He ain't gonna kill you. Okay. I'll go with that. Word self-control diverged from what God was told him. Right there at that point where you make that decision. Do I serve this guy or do I serve this guy? Which one created me after all? Self-control. By the way, the word disciple comes from the word, and this is a Latin word. I wrote this down. Hopefully I can pronounce it correctly. Discipulus. D-I-S-C-I-P-L-U-S. Discipulus also means pupil. When you go into English class, when you were in school, you were called a student, but you're also a pupil. We're not talking about the pupils of our eyes here. We're talking about someone that's going to study and to learn. I mean, why did you go to school in the first place? Well, Mom and Dad shoved me out the door, made me ride my bicycle, walk, or they took me to school. These days, kids don't even bother walking there. Everybody gets taken there. But nevertheless, you're going to learn whether you like it or not. Well, maybe is that the reason why you don't read the Bible as much as you should? Is that the reason why I don't read it as much as I should? Because I feel like I'm being forced to? But a true disciple, gee whiz, the true disciples, who stuck beside Jesus on the day he was arrested? Two. The others ran for the hills. What do you think they learned from that experience? Disciples. So, with that being said, I've kind of used this lesson to set up something that BC asked me to start speaking on. And what I'm going to do, I'm just kind of calling this rapid fire. If you've got your Bible or your phone ready to go in Proverbs, I just want to read the first few lines of each chapter except the last two, 30 and 31. Okay? So in verse 1, or chapter 1, let's just read down. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. Chapter 2. My son, if you will receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry for discernment, lift your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Chapter 3. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For the length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Chapter 4. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, then he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast to my words, keep my commandments and live. Acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. Do not forget or turn away from the words of my mouth. Proverbs 6, chapter 6. The title on the top of this one is Parental Counsel. So when you read this, think about maybe your parents. I'll think about my parents. My son, if you have become surety for your neighbor, have given a pledge for a stranger, if you have been snared with the words of your mouth, have been caught with the words of your mouth, do this then, my son, and deliver yourself, since you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go humble yourself and importune your neighbor. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's band, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. What do you think he's talking about there? I'm not going to answer the question. You want to know? Study it. And next week, come tell me. Chapter 7, verse 1. My son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Keep my commandments and live, and my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your intimate friend, that they may keep you from an adulteress, from the foreigner who flatters with her words. When we think of adulteress, we think of, like, I'll use kind of a loose word, a floozy, okay? Kind of an old-fashioned type word. But what is he really talking about here? What is he really talking about? He's talking about going against God's commandments, okay? Because see, think about it. To get involved with an adulteress like that, it's a strong attraction. It's like a magnetic pull. You really can't feel it. You can't see it, but it's that attraction to something. And it comes back to serving self. Chapter 8, verse 1. Does not wisdom call and understanding lift up her voice? On top of the heights beside the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening to the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out, to you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O naive ones, understand prudence, and O fools, understand wisdom. Listen, for I will speak noble things, and the opening of my lips will reveal right things. For my mouth will utter truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the utterances of my mouth are in righteousness. There is nothing crooked or perverted in them. They are all straightforward to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction and not silver, and knowledge rather than choicest gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all desirable things cannot compare with her. Chapter 8. That's the beginning of chapter 8. What is he saying about wisdom? How beneficial is wisdom to you, to us? Is it just something to be toyed with? The day of judgment, he's going to say, what did you do with what I told you to do? What did you do with it? Well, I kind of kicked it to the curb, or I towed it behind me and I pulled it out when it was useful. But that's when I thought it would be useful. Just saying there. Boy. All we got to do is look at human history, and it bears out what's being talked about here. How we just basically ignore it. Chapter 9.
And I can already tell you right now, we're not going to get all the way through all of this. Chapter 9, verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has set out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here.
Naive. Don't be willingly ignorant. Willingly ignorant is another way of maybe kind of using the word stupid. Don't be willingly ignorant. Don't ignore this. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come, eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. Is this starting to make sense? How many times, how repetitive has this got to be? Apparently a lot. God realizes to defeat self is a tough thing. And it goes back to discipleship. Just wandering around in the desert and saying you're a disciple is one thing, but applying it when it comes time to apply what you've learned to teach others. This is what they're talking about here. Chapter 10, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise man makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. Ill-gotten gains do not profit. Can you take them with you when you're dead? Ill-gotten gains do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord will not allow the righteous to hunger, but he will reject the craving of the wicked. Will not allow the righteous to hunger. What is he talking about here in terms of hunger? Is he talking about physical, your tummy says, it's time to eat? What's he talking about here? What is the summation of Proverbs? I've heard it said before, you're feeding your mind. You're feeding your mind with the good stuff. Not the one that says, yeah, you can take a bite of that apple. You won't die. Was that the bad stuff? Yeah. But the really bad stuff was, yeah, boy, that's for me. For me. For me. So when you say for me, would it be these words right here out of the first part of chapter 10? Chapter 11, first verse. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but just to wait is his delight. When pride comes, then comes dishonor, but the humble is wisdom. I'll stop right there. Me and BC and Barbie had to endure what me and BC were doing Wednesday night. BC set me straight on how a lot of the court systems work in the United States. And I had to admit my ignorance of it. When you don't know something, you make your matters worse when you try to pretend that you do know. So what happens there? Who's lying to who? Yeah, you're lying to the person you're speaking to, but you're also lying to yourself in that think God won't remember? You might pose this question to yourself: how will God remember? Well, we have this thing in our brains, it's called memory. I think that scroll of memory might not get rolled out and looked at when it comes time. Told you we wouldn't get all the way through. Start again in chapter 11, verse 1. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. When pride comes, then comes dishonor, but with humble is wisdom. Swallow your pride. Humble yourself. Verse 3, the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them.
Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. We'll stop there, and let's end this. Let's go ahead and just go over to chapter 12 right quick. And I really didn't give myself a cutoff point on this one. Chapter 12, verse 1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. A good man will obtain favor from the Lord, but he will condemn a man who devises evil. A man will not be established by wickedness, but the root of the righteousness will be moved. Verse 4. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is like rottenness in his bones. The thoughts of the righteous are just, but the counsels of the wicked are deceitful. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. A man will be praised according to his insight, but one of perverse mind will be despised. We'll stop right there. That verse 8 right there. I'll repeat this one more time. A man will be praised according to his insight, but one of perverse mind will be despised. You pose a question with that. Why? I'll leave you to think about that. I've thought about it, but again, come to a conclusion on it, and especially considering just the brief amount that we read out of Proverbs. I mean, we got the short course on this thing. If there's any questions, if I've said anything in error, I almost forgot. It's riddle time. Here is the riddle. And you got to listen, because I wrote real small to get this in here. I give knowledge, but don't receive it. My brothers and I have lived for many centuries and in many places, each with our own unique faces. To my tall friends that made me, I am a mere baby. If it weren't for me that you seek, or if it weren't for me that you seek, you may not know how to speak. What am I? I'll repeat it again. I give knowledge, but don't receive it. My brothers and I have lived for many centuries and in many places, each with our own unique faces. To my tall friends that made me, I am a mere baby. If it weren't for me that you seek, you may not know how to speak. What am I? So get your mind going. Don't cheat. Okay. What is it? I'm not going to answer yes or no. Anybody else want to hold up their hand and venture a guess? I'm not going to answer. I'll tell you all next week. But the thing is, if you can, think about this. If anybody wants me to repeat it to them, just let me know, and I'll come repeat it to you. But remember, the idea is to get you to think. That's the reason why these riddles, that's why it occurs in the first part of Proverbs. Think, and think correctly. Thank you.